Hi, welcome to Tuesday's Indycar. My name's Gordon Ross. Today I wanted to talk to you about the third runway at Heathrow Airport. Those of you who follow such things on the internet and on television will know that last night's vote in the Houses of Parliament produced a win for the Tories in their plans to build a third runway at Heathrow Airport. Despite 20 years of objections and delays and court cases and all kinds of problems with this plan, they have now decided to do it. Now, it's also been reported that the SNP abstained on this particular idea. Now, in the past, they had been in favour of it for the simple reason that the Tories had promised that Scotland would see certain benefits from this third runway, and namely the fact that there would be promise of more flights flying from the Heathrow hub directly to Glasgow and Edinburgh international airports. Now, it seems like what's happened is that the Tories' promises of these extra flights cannot be guaranteed, and the Tories seem to have withdrawn these promises, and therefore the SNP had no choice but to turn down the third runway. But what I think was troubling in most people was the fact that the SNP decided to abstain on the runway rather than saying no to it, because it is primarily an English matter. This is a runway that benefits only England, because the Tories have not promised any kind of possible benefit for Scotland, despite us having to share the massive costs of building this thing. Now, the massive costs of building this runway are estimated to be £14 billion. Now, that's just to lay a strip of tarmac about a mile long in a bit of English countryside next to the airport. Now, surely it cannot cost £14 billion to lay a strip of tarmac on the English countryside on a piece of land which is, let's face it, already graded, flattened and planted with grass. However, knowing public works the way we do, we can probably anticipate that the cost of this runway will skyrocket as soon as the contracts are signed. My guess is it will cost more likely double or even triple what they're estimating, because obviously the contractors want to make as much money as possible out of any public contract like this. But where does that leave Scotland? Some of us, I noticed online this morning, are angry at the SNP for abstaining instead of just voting no. Abstaining basically says that we are sitting on the fence with this one. We're not really bothered one way or the other. It doesn't add up to much. It isn't, or it doesn't seem, at least to the public in Scotland, to be anything like as decisive as the walkout was, for example, the other week. So it's not really much of a response from the SNP, and it's a bit lukewarm, but the point is that they couldn't support this runway. Had they voted against it, it might have actually gone the other way. I'm not sure what the voting numbers were, but I understand the voting numbers were very high, so I can't really comment. But one of the interesting things about this is that this third runway, now that it is going to go ahead, is going to take another 50% more traffic, for obvious reasons. If you've got two runways and you add another one, you're adding 50% to your capacity. Now, where are those flights going to come from? Are these the flights that would normally go to Glasgow or Prestwick or Edinburgh airports being diverted through Heathrow? Because that's the way it seems. It seems that Heathrow is now going to be competing for business with a competitive advantage, which the people of Scotland have paid for themselves out of their own pocket to actually damage our own airports, which seems an utterly crazy thing to do. That's my view on it. I think that this was a mistake. I think we should have voted against it completely on all kinds of grounds, including the pollution angle, but more especially on the economic angle as well, because I think and I believe that the third runway is entirely for the benefit of England after Brexit. The reason for doing it is the same as the reason for doing High Speed 2. It's to spend a lot of money on a big infrastructure project that will keep people busy and occupied for weeks and months and years, while they try and get Brexit sorted out and try and work out a way of trading with people. And increasing the capacity at the airport is one of the ways that they can get more business into the UK. Fair enough for England, okay, but for Scotland, no, not so much. It's going to damage the airports in Glasgow and Edinburgh, because they're not going to see so much international traffic. It's obvious to anybody. A fool could see it. So anyway, how does that leave things in Scotland? Well, interestingly, if you put the airport issue aside, things in Scotland are actually looking pretty good. There are a lot of initiatives going on behind the scenes, and a lot of the pieces that are necessary, pieces I'm talking about of national infrastructure, that are required for a new country to succeed and to actually walk away from the United Kingdom on our own, are already in place. We have our own benefit system now. It's in place. So we can pay pensions and we can pay benefits to people who require them, like disabled, unemployed, so on. So that's in place. We have an investment bank. Now, you might not think an investment bank's all that important, but if you're a new country just starting out, the one thing you really want to do is encourage people to invest in your country and its future. And you do that by selling bonds. Now, these are basically guaranteed investments that if people buy a government bond, the government guarantees to give them a certain amount, a percentage on that investment every year for as long as they hold those bonds. So it's a guaranteed payback for any investor. But you can only do that if you have a national investment bank. That's what we now have. So when Scotland is finally free of the Union and is restored to its original state of being a country, we'll have the physical infrastructure to attract the investment that we need into the Scottish nation as a whole. And that investment will come in the form of these bonds initially, but also this bank can handle other things like investment into our industries, investment into growing new companies, investment into existing companies, investment into our banking system, our insurance system and so forth. So it's big, it's a big deal. We've got it, we've already got it in place. And we have a tax system. We have an Inland Revenue Office in Scotland which can deal with the taxes of the workforce and the taxes of the companies and corporations which operate here. So, taking a big breath, that means that Scotland will be ready to hit the ground running as a fully fledged country without having to wait or have any kind of big hiatus. We'll be ready to be a country. And this is something we didn't have in 2014. We didn't have these things in place. We didn't have a currency in place either, and we didn't have an investment bank, and we didn't have the ability to give pensions. We have all of those things now. We can say to people, your pensions will be paid, your benefits will be paid, there will be investment into the Scottish nation from outside by the billions, because we are rich in oil and renewables and gas and food. We have so much to offer the rest of the world that people will flock to invest. The interesting thing that I noticed the other day is also that our First Minister has been to Germany and has signed some agreements with the Germans to set up a Scottish office in Berlin. Now this is the precursor, I believe, to setting up Scottish offices in every European city, like little consulates, like little, little ambassadors, if you like, all over Europe. But Germany is one of the more important or bigger countries in Europe that we need to keep contact with, and having an office there permanently is a good start. And I believe that the SNP is probably making lots of connections with European countries and other countries in the background all the time while we are waiting to watch Brexit unravel. So, despite what's happened with the third runway at Heathrow, there will be a future for Scotland's airports, and I believe that Prestwick is a strategic asset, not only as a hub for freight, but also as a new spaceport for the development of space tourism. Now that would be rocket planes which take off on the back of another aircraft from a normal runway and fly up to altitude, and then the rockets fire and take the tourists into space, into the borders of space. Now that's already being done by Richard Branson's company in America, and they are looking for other places to operate. Prestwick would be ideal. It's got a long runway and it has a sea approach, an ocean approach, so it's empty of people. We also have perfect places for other types of space tourism. Machrihanish is another perfect place for that. Machrihanish is remote. It has an open aspect. You can launch vertically there using rockets like the new Blue Origin New Glenn, which is a passenger carrying rocket which will take up to 6 or 8, I think it's 6 initially, 6 passengers into space and return them straight back to Earth obviously for a fare. Now, these things might sound like pie in the sky to you, but they're already developed and sites for operating them are being looked for all the time, and having one in Europe would be a big feather in their cap. We already have infrastructure in place for tidal energy, but the investment was cut by the Westminster government. So one of the first things that the investment bank needs to do is bring in money to invest in our tidal industry, because it is one of the biggest resources we have. It's bigger probably even than oil. So I think the situation looks good, despite what's happening with the airport runway at Heathrow. But airport runway at Heathrow is their problem, and I think it will run into problems. It will run into legal challenges, it will be opposed, people will be protesting against it, and it will create a lot of diversion, I suppose, away from what's happening with Brexit. But we do know in terms of aviation that Airbus will pull out of the UK eventually, because Brexit will force them to do it. And I would think actually that Ireland is already gearing up to make a bid for building Airbus wings in Ireland. And it would be nice if the industry cluster around Prestwick was ready to make some kind of a bid as well, so that when Brexit does force Airbus to think of leaving the United Kingdom, that as Scotland leaves the United Kingdom as well, that we can do a bit of a deal with Airbus to bring the Airbus wing manufacturing to somewhere like Prestwick. There are always opportunities in these disasters if you know where to look for them. I bet you any money that people in the Scottish Government are already thinking about this, but Prestwick to me seems an ideal place for building Airbus wings, because Airbus wings need both a seaport and an airport in order to transport them, and need good transport links. Prestwick's got that. It's also close to the sea, it's close to seaports, also useful for transporting large wing structures to France, which is sometimes how they do these things. Sometimes they send a large plane to carry the smaller wings. But either way, Prestwick's ideally placed for that. So despite this third runway at Heathrow, we're not out of the game in terms of aviation. So Scotland has a lot of the infrastructure in place now for us to become independent, and there's an exciting future ahead for us if we take the opportunities that are presented by Brexit. What is England's loss will be Scotland's gain when we're independent. If car manufacturers decide to leave the United Kingdom, if Scotland is already independent and has either a trade deal with the EU or is a part of it, then those car manufacturers will migrate to the next nearest country, and that is Scotland. And we have a highly trained workforce, we have the space to build factories, and we have the education system to produce the bright people that are needed in these industries. It's just we didn't have these industries ourselves before, because most of these types of inwards investment were concentrated in the south of England. Anyway, I've said enough for the time being, but think on. The third runway at Heathrow Airport is not a massive disaster for Scotland at the moment, but after it's built, it will be competing directly with us. And that's why, again, this is pushing us even more firmly towards the exit door of the UK. If we stay in the UK, our airports will lose out. If we leave the UK, we have a good chance of doing things like attracting Airbus, and also of opening our own hub at Prestwick, as well as Glasgow and Edinburgh airports taking international flights from across the Atlantic as well, and from Europe, and stealing back some of what we've lost from this third runway. Anyway, I'm off. I've got to do some more work, but I'll speak to you again tomorrow. If you have any comments about today's show, you know how to reach me. I'm happy to take up any other subjects that you might want to suggest for programmes in the future. Anyway, I'll see you later. Bye for now.